Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. It should come as no surprise that Massachusetts, the state which nurtured the most notorious cases of mass hysteria in American history, and that's the Salem Witch Trials, of course, is also the same state currently perfecting the witch hunt against vaping. On Wednesday, the Massachusetts Public Health Council made permanent its ban on the sale of flavored vaping products and it mandated signs warning consumers of, quote, severe lung disease, close quote, to be posted at retail locations where unflavored vaping products might be sold. Massachusetts is not alone, as public health bureaucrats in the state of New York voted this week to extend its ban on flavored e-cigarettes, even though the ban is currently held up in court. What's driving the vape ban mayhem, and how are consumers being affected? To help us answer these questions and more is Alex Clark, CEO of CASAA, the National Consumer Advocacy Organization for Smoke-Free Alternatives. Alex, thanks for joining us again here on RegWatch.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. Well, we're in for a treat tonight, as when Alex and I talk, either political forces align or they repel. And mostly that's because I usually bring up progressives and then it just goes downhill from there. So Alex, speaking of progressives, what's going on in Massachusetts?
Well, first of all, whenever I think of progressive, I think of moving forward, not moving backwards or moving in silly directions, which is exactly what's happening in Massachusetts. I'm looking at a sort of a packet of all of the stuff that retailers need to be aware of. Everybody really needs to be aware of. And since you brought it up at the beginning, this warning that tobacco retailers are going to be required to post actually doesn't offer any clarity about what the CDC has found, which is that the illicit THC cartridges, many of them containing vitamin E acetate, are what is primarily driving the lung injuries. Just to read, I can read the entire thing here really quickly.
Sure. Is that one of the links you sent me, or do I have that?
I don't know if I sent that. Actually, people can look this up at mass.gov/new tobacco law.
Sure, just shoot me an email right now.
Where that is.
Send that to me by email right now, and we'll get it. We'll put it up. It's a funny, weird thing about technology, right?
Yeah, I should have probably. I have to separate this from another email.
No problem.
Which I can do, but basically, this entire warning sort of pins everything on nicotine vaping, and it includes this warning at the end with e-cigarette aerosol can contain cancer-causing chemicals and other substances that harm the body, with no mention of potential harms of THC cartridges, legal or otherwise. And this is a part of some breaking news, I think, over the past few hours. As of today, marijuana dispensaries in Massachusetts are allowed to start selling THC cartridges as long as they were manufactured after December 12th, or I guess on December 20th and after. And there's, I guess, a new regulation about how you can't put vitamin E acetate in these cartridges. And there have to be tests for heavy metals. That's the other thing. So as Massachusetts has laid down these very weird and overly restrictive regulations about flavored products and a nicotine cap, a bizarre nicotine cap. They are greenlighting sales of THC oil cartridges that are, people were using these products for long enough before this whole thing started. So I don't want to, throw any shade on the cannabis industry, but it is really just backwards that, the products that have been primarily linked to these lung injuries are now being allowed to be sold, again, legally in Massachusetts.
So, and for our Canadian audience and those in the U.S. that aren't familiar with exactly which states it's legal for cannabis in the U.S., Mass is one of them.
Correct.
Right. So
yeah, we have several states have legal marketplaces. Vermont, marijuana is legal, but they don't have a regulated marketplace. And there's several others that have adopted rules that would allow marijuana this year.
So here I've got, you can see this, and it's the same thing we're showing our audience right now, Alex. And this was out a couple of days ago. So is this what you're speaking about here? Or Mass just lifted its ban on vaping? What is that?
No, so yeah, this is being reported in a really weird way. Essentially, the flavor ban is in place. Devices and other, atomizers and tanks and stuff like that can be sold, but it's the only flavor you can sell is tobacco flavor. And the weird limit here is if you are going to sell a product that has more than 35 milligrams per milliliter of nicotine, it has to be in an adult-only establishment. I believe that may actually be a tobacco bar.
Yeah, I think that's what I read the notice from the state notice on that. And that is exactly that. Yeah.
Right, and that is, and just so everyone is clear, a tobacco bar is not a vape shop. A tobacco bar is someplace where people go and they are expected to consume the product on site. So you're not buying bottles of e-liquid and taking them home with you. You have to, buy whatever you buy and vape it. Just really just defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah, I mean that's like, yeah, for sure. I mean,
yeah.
That makes no sense, not at all. But then all of these rules in Massachusetts are really complicated and convoluted, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm getting confused just trying to explain it to you here.
Yeah. Well, that's quite all right. But I guess what strikes me, though, is this issue, the fact that the THC carts are approved for sale there.
Yeah, and it seems that, Massachusetts, I think, is going some distance toward protecting the legal cannabis market. When this happened, obviously, they weren't overstepping to the point of shutting down dispensaries like they did with vape shops. So I don't believe that they should have overstepped, of course. But yeah, it is sort of shocking that they would allow the THC cartridges to come back and really not consider any of the arguments the very credible arguments that we've all been making about how flavored vapor products, we deserve access to these products.
Right, exactly. Well, it's strange. Well, it's not strange because it's the part of the hypocrisy that's been going on. But they just simply refuse to see nicotine vaping devices as harm reduction, as something that's got any medicinal value. But they're sold on the fact that cannabis has got its medical marijuana connection. And I mean, that's why marijuana is legal for the most part in many of the states, including all of Canada. If it wasn't for its medicinal qualities, I don't know if we'd ever be here in this particular case. But there's just absolute refusal to consider nicotine being the drug that's involved as having, some kind of quality to it that's beneficial.
Yeah, I think the other part of the story here, of course, is, like you said, going through this process of making the case that cannabis can be used for medical purposes. I think many people can have their own opinions on whether or not that was necessary. Politically, it seems to have been necessary. But once we've got to the point of greenlighting, the tax and regulate marketplace, there has to be some acknowledgement here that having a legal regulated marketplace for cannabis, and for that matter, other drugs, if you want to go that far, it's all about taking away the products being sold and purchased on the black market, and also the social injustice that's been happening. I was told not to say it, but we have this racist war on drugs in the United States, and there are a lot of people who deserve to be, I think, made whole after being incarcerated or jammed up in the legal system for whatever reason. So acknowledging all of that has been part of greenlighting cannabis sales. And it's amazing to me that in this day and age, lawmakers have these very thick blinders on and cannot recognize the parallels between certain issues. And certainly there's a very good case for a parallel between legalizing cannabis and keeping nicotine vapor products legal.
Yeah. So we've got the story here. This was, as you said, breaking news. This is Massachusetts ban on THC vape pens is over now. It's over now, too. Yay. The state's ban on THC vaporizers has come to an end following a vote from the Cannabis Control Commission. And I was just looking to see if there was a great amount of rejoicing here. So on Wednesday, we reported on the news that Massachusetts' vaping ban has officially come to an end after 3 months. And again, this issue. It's so, as reporters, that you'd think they'd have a big duty here to be much clearer than they are. Beginning Wednesday, people who use e-cigarettes to get their nicotine fixed. Now, see, that's just that, that is so, that's so punkish, to do that,
It's very dismissive. Yeah.
Yeah. It's dismissive is a nice way. They're being punks here because they know exactly what they're doing when they choose that language. Certainly in the context of, in the next breath, they're going to be talking about THC, and they're not going to be using the word fix when it comes to somebody using cannabis. You know that, right? They won't, right? And so
I don't even think they talk about it in terms of people who want to get high.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That was the old days, right? You don't get high off of marijuana. You get an effect. Right. That's what the Canadian government calls it. When they legalize it, you read all of the government regulations and rules and all the forward-facing consumer copy. So across the entire country, it's tweaked a little bit differently across each province, but it's the effect.
That is very characteristically Canadian polite.
Well, yeah. Well, they don't want to say hi. What else are you going to say? Let's just make sure. I want to make sure we keep going through this. Okay. So beginning Wednesday, people who use e-cigarettes to get their nicotine fix can resume buying vapes and vape products so long as they're unflavored and conform with new rules from the Department of Public Health. Now, the cops are coming to get me because they know I've got a vape here. So, all right.
You're in Canada. You're fine.
Yeah. Well, this is my studio here in downtown Vancouver, and we're right on Granville and Pender. And so the downtown east side is literally east by about 4 blocks. And that's, the focal point of what's been the biggest, hard drug heroin place in all of North America for many years, until the United States decided that they wanted to, have a run for the record, which... you can have it. So, all right, but a ban on THC vapes in pot shops remained in place. So now, one day later, that ban has been lifted too. So, the way they're framing this is that they had a ban on vaping products. I guess, I don't know, was it on all the it was actually on flavors, right, for the last several months?
No, in Massachusetts, it was on everything.
It was on everything, right?
Yes.
So now they've come back and they've said vapes are okay again for nicotine. It's just they have to be unflavored vapes. And that's the first problem that I wish we could just wring everyone's neck over, because there's no such thing as an unflavored vape. They're referring to tobacco flavors. I mean, so it's like it. And what I find so pernicious about this is it's that you are so tobacco, like you are actually tobacco. Everything about vaping is tobacco. You're so much tobacco that you're just the regular old taste of a burning leaf is the de facto taste of your propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. And so that's like the first. That's like it's unbelievable. I mean, how much that bothers me, because there's no such thing as unflavored vaping, unless you really are actually just vaping propylene glycol. But anyhow.
Even that has a sweet taste to it.
Right.
It's not pleasant, but it is possible.
Right.
The other thing, since we're talking about flavors, another one of these cosmic ironies about the Massachusetts rules is that they're allowing menthol cigarettes to be sold until June 1st of next year. So several concessions have been made to the traditional forms of revenue for Massachusetts, and of course one of them being continuing the sales of menthol cigarettes, which were never banned under the rules that we just went through.
So let's let's take a moment here then and jump into a couple of clips that I've got for us to view. And so you had mentioned the injustices around the war on drugs. We just had Ethan Adelman on, who was the founder and longtime executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. And I'm sure you're familiar with Ethan.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And you guys, I mean, I get the sense that drug policy and stuff is very much a concern for CASAA. I don't know officially, but definitely it's a part of your guys' book. Was that fair to say?
I think some flavor of it, if you will, is a part of our work. It's been, I think one of my goals has been to, I think, move the conversation to, nicotine is a drug, just like THC or cocaine or heroin or alcohol, and that while we're having this conversation about legalization and winding down the drug war, I think we have to include, nicotine in that conversation to make sure that it doesn't fully expand into a new front on the war on drugs. And, when we talk about, my heart goes out to all of these parents who are dealing with kids who are experiencing substance use issues in high school and junior high. I started experimenting with drugs when I was 13 years old. I put my parents through the ringer. I'm never going to forget that experience. But when we start talking about substance use treatment or substance use education, I think all of the things that are applying to drug education also apply to nicotine. But there seems to be this disconnect that, here's street drugs over here, and then here's tobacco, and policymakers and activists have made this clear distinction between nicotine and other drugs. But I think that all of the lessons that we are now applying to substance use disorder, I think they're also appropriately applied to dealing with young people who are habitually using vapor products or cigarettes or whatever, and helping them, change their habits and improve their lives.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a drug issue. I've had some of our viewers recently, actually after some comments on our piece with Ethan earlier this week, which was on Tuesday, making some comments, very frustrated about the fact that there are vapes out there. There's juice that come in at 0 milligrams, so you don't need the nicotine to be vaping. And so thus, to totally conjoin vaping with nicotine is a misnomer. I've heard that for years now, and I don't think it's a valid argument. For one, nobody that's in a decision-making position at all even understands why somebody would vape 0 nic. I mean, we've got people in the community who certainly do, but it's not a valid way to stand up against this stuff. Public health believes that you shouldn't be putting anything inside your lungs, for those that are very radical on it. And so in the end, they can at least understand the fact that nicotine's a drug. And because they believe that it's so evil and as bad as heroin, that it gets claws into you and then you can never, let go of it. They just don't even understand why somebody would be vaping then without it. Like, it's just, kind of lost, because it is indeed a drug.
Yeah, I've reflected. I did an interview back in September, and the woman who I was across from mentioned, she congratulated me for quitting smoking and said something about, and because we all know that cigarettes are evil, and this whole idea that tobacco is evil or nicotine is evil or any of this stuff is evil, I think speaks to people's what's the word? People are prone to mysticism and assigning magical powers to drugs. For example, the gateway myth is all about this notion that a substance may have some magical ability to make you take bigger risks later on. I understand that there are some effects on the brain, but the idea that someone loses their agency as soon as they start drinking alcohol smoking a cigarette, and all of a sudden they just can't control themselves, and the world of drugs is at their doorstep, forcing them to do something else. That's just absurd. So like you said, this stuff that we're seeing in Massachusetts, this is the result of officials and policymakers who absolutely they're willfully ignorant about how this industry started, how the industry functions, and they're going after the wrong people.
Well, you said kind of a mystical kind of a thing, right? I mean, that is the rhetoric around the writing on this piece is the witch hunt, the Salem Witch Trials. I mean, the mass hysterias and witch hunts and superstitions and all that stuff, they go together. Like, you can't separate superstition from witch hunt.
No, yeah. And it's all sort of, all of these things, all of the talking points that, for example, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids puts out, and the Truth Initiative, all of these groups, it seems like it's just easy to believe that, for example, this whole flavors are targeted at kids thing that's easy to believe. It's not remotely true, but it's very easy for people to believe. And so a lot of their support, it's based in, the rhetoric of the tobacco wars, that, flavors were used. There's memos talking about this and that. And, at one point it may have been true for cigarettes, but it's absolutely not true. It's never been true for vaping. But yeah, I mean, people see or hear the name cotton candy or strawberry, and you immediately think that it's for kids, which I reject outright. I've had some delicious vapes that didn't say cotton candy on the bottle and tasted like cotton candy, and I have strawberries on my keto waffle every day. So there.
Yeah, so there. Well, and old Senator Romney and his favorite unicorn poop.
Right.
Yeah. Look, let's be honest. If we're to believe these adults in terms of their characterization of their kids and young people, we are in serious trouble as a society if these kids represent, if they at all are as completely, totally dumb and stupid as these adults say they are, and totally, completely captured by a fad like juuling, and so they can't control it. They here. It's so funny because Meredith Beckman, in her little diatribe there to President Trump, she said in that meeting in the Oval at the White House, she said that parents are in pain. Parents are in pain. They don't even recognize their children. What does that mean?
Well, yeah, I heard that as well. And again, drawing on my experience as a teenager and what I put my parents through, my mom always used to say, I was a really wonderful child until I hit 13. And that's when I started experimenting with all of this stuff. And from my perspective, based on my experience, I would say, parents really need to be looking into what other things their kids are experiencing, and not necessarily, this isn't limited to drugs. I don't want to make assumptions about Miss Berkman or any of the PAVE moms. I think a lot of people have put it out there that these are affluent parents. They're very well connected politically and socially. Their kids are in really good school districts. I would say that the school districts are predominantly white. I don't have any evidence to back that up, but I think that's a pretty safe bet. And this is sort of one of those things that's overwhelmingly affecting more affluent communities. These products are cheap. So this is not necessarily across all socioeconomic categories here. But I will say, it is, I imagine it would be very scary for a parent to see rapid and disturbing changes in their child and really not know what to do about it. And I think, again, this goes back to the drug war. We've been through decades of just bad education about substance use. And, at no point are, I guess depending on what school district you're in, at no point are students being given the tools they need to support one another peer to peer, have uncomfortable conversations about substance use, have critical conversations with adults about what they should be doing to make sure their friends are okay, making sure that they're okay. And parents are not really being given the tools other than tell your kids to say no. Just, lock the door, turn out the lights, and everything will be fine. That's not how anything has ever worked in the world ever. You can't just ignore it. We have to be equipped with the right tools to have constructive, critical conversations with people who are using substances, including nicotine. And we really have to get to the root causes, which can be, there's a cornucopia of issues that people face in high school and middle school, and all of these can be motivating factors for going out and seeking some sort of stress relief or just relief from depression or, wanting to fit in, find your crowd. All of these things can motivate kids to trying these products, and a small percentage of them to go on to use them for long term.
So you mentioned again the war on drugs. So let's use this as an opportunity to jump into a couple of these clips. So Ethan Adelman, he was speaking in this first clip, basically in terms of setup. He had just talked about how the Drug Policy Alliance and those who, and lots of people, right, of course, and lots of organizations had spent considerable time, decades, fighting this war on drugs, which was a highly moral orientated. I mean, we all remember Nancy Reagan and the neoconservative position of the 1980s and war on drugs. Just say no, right? War on drugs. And how these groups, achieved a lot of success. And you can argue how much or not, but some definitely success on needle exchange, and definitely success on marijuana. And then, of course, there's been some changes that have happened in the U.S. with regards to some easing up on some drug-related offenses. So he explained that, and then he jumps in to vaping.
Once you start banning things, which, that's what we're doing now. When you start banning things and making it illegal to possess or to sell or whatever these things, inevitably you have to start enforcing those bans, which means that inevitably the police start to get involved, and inevitably the prosecutors start to get involved. And so I think there's a decent chance that we're going to see people not just getting arrested, but even going to jail for violating the laws against vaping. You're going to see people, who essentially are trying to protect their health in a harm reduction way that's proven by science, by switching from smoking to vaping. You're going to see those people and the people who supply them and market to them being arrested. And I have to tell you, it reminds me of what happened with needle exchange, where people who were trying to distribute sterile syringes used to spread HIV, among injecting drug users, were being arrested and incarcerated and prosecuted. I mean, it is from both a public health perspective and a moral perspective absolutely horrific.
Absolutely horrific.
Yep.
So
I think that sums it up pretty well. And of course, Massachusetts, I think, will be the first place that I think I've already heard of people being harassed shortly after the ban was implemented.
So describe that for us from what you've heard.
I think this was probably more of a potential Me Too moment for the person I heard this from. But she was approached by, I believe, a Massachusetts state trooper who saw her vaping and said he, of course, did not understand the law, but I think threatened to arrest her or fine her for possessing a flavored vapor product. And the Massachusetts law, and of course these regulations that were recently adopted, goes further than just banning flavored vapes as we know it. It also prohibits the sale and possession of flavor enhancers, which I think, I have certainly understood that to mean that, DIY supplies, possession of DIY supplies is illegal in Massachusetts. And so, somebody who's seen vaping in public, if you've got an overly vicious police officer who, for whatever reason wants to approach them and give them trouble, if they are in possession of, I don't know, if they are walking back from getting some DIY supplies or whatever, they could find themselves in some sort of legal trouble.
So, where are you from, Alex? I mean, you're not looking for hometowns or anything, but what state are you from?
I live in New York.
Okay.
Not New York City.
Not New York City. So, having some idea here when I frame this, and don't you forget, and I'm sure our viewers won't let me forget either, and we won't forget California. The reason why we're not talking about California is because they're just crazy. So I wanted to have some framework, and Massachusetts certainly gave us that. What do you think it is about the folks in Mass? Because, I mean, regardless, I mean, it's progressive. I mean, they've got a particular kind of approach to things. And why so, illiberal when it comes to vaping?
Well, I think it's hard for me to put my finger on it. I am not from Massachusetts. This is the closest to New England I think I've ever lived. Some might say where I am in New York it might as well be part of New England. There's a lot of Boston sports team fans around here. But I think generally Massachusetts, of course, has this Puritan history, and I think their approach to this is simply based on a moral crusade. They are not taking a critical look at the numbers, and again, I think this falls back to the mysticism and people's tendency to just accept things that are easy to believe. That being, I think, a driver of why people are not really investigating or taking a critical look at what the numbers actually tell us about young people using these products, and it leads to bad policy making. I don't necessarily know if maybe given the culture in Massachusetts, looking like you're tough on crime or tough on tobacco or tough on other drugs that are not socially acceptable other than cannabis, if that wins you votes or campaign donations, I'm not really sure. So really, I think all I have to rely on is that Massachusetts prides itself at being at the forefront of tobacco control, much like places in California. It really, we're bookended in this country by two states that have gone sort of, by municipality enacting these policies in waves. First, they started with banning vaping indoors, and then they moved on to raising the age to 21, other sales restrictions. Several municipalities throughout Massachusetts have already have their own flavor regulations in place, limiting sales to adult-only establishments, and so on. So it really is sort of this. It's almost a race to the bottom, if you will, in terms of quality policy.
Right. So with regard to Mass, so when they banned everything, so just fill us in because there are so many bans that were happening, and it forced a lot of people to really focus on their own local neighborhoods and their own, counties and stuff like that, and cities that they're in. And then, of course, I'm up in Canada, so it's tough because we have to take a national view, and then we've got Canada to worry about too. So when Mass went with the original ban, did all the stores have to shut down? Like, was that it?
Yeah, immediately. The ban took effect. There was no warning given to retailers. I think people heard the news, and within 4 hours, shops like state police were showing up at vape shops.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
So the industry's been devastated there.
Pretty much. There's a really interesting story that came out yesterday or today, and it's I guess it was after the announcement that the ban is lifted, which is not true at all, right. Really. But there's a couple people that own a vape shop in Brockton, and they will be reopening, and of course they can sell the devices and so on. But now they have to change their business model to include selling combustible and other tobacco products, so that they can keep their doors open. And something really important to remember is that a lot of these retailers, they signed leases 3-5 years, however long a commercial lease is where you are, and a lot of people didn't necessarily get clauses worked into their contracts that say if the government destroys the industry, I can get out of this lease with no penalty. So a lot of these people are stuck. I mean, not only are they being, financially hurt because they can't sell their products anymore, but they're also saddled with a contract with a landlord that's thousands of dollars a month. So of course people have to make adjustments. There's another shop featured in this article that's going to be selling, I don't want to say paraphernalia, but selling devices and equipment for smoking cannabis. And of course they could probably sell the batteries to be used for the THC cartridges as well. And for anybody who's interested, the title of the article is Brockton Area Vape Businesses Open Doors After Statewide Ban Ends, and that's in the Enterprise. Pretty interesting look at how people have had to adapt to the new rules.
Yeah, that's I'll look for that too as well. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I didn't type it in. Vape ban, a death sentence for Brockton area vape shops. Yeah, no kidding. I'll find that for sure. The joke is, of course, is that all the ancillary businesses that are going to, start up. I mean, when are we going to see the first vape shop, but with only tobacco flavors, your actual combustibles with like sex shop toys and stuff like that next? I mean, it could revert, the small places that are left will revert back to that kind of variety, triple X kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, we've seen, I was about to say that, CBD is certainly a model that people have adopted. I think it was about a year ago that I found out that there were CBD only stores in certain parts of the country, which I thought was kind of amazing. I didn't think that you would be able to sustain a business that way. So I think you'll see a lot of people converting to selling CBD, which that's got its own issues. And the FDA is I think going to be cracking down on that. They already are. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of risk for anybody trying to keep the doors open and continue paying the rent on their commercial space in Massachusetts. I mean, a hybrid tobacco and sex shop sounds fine with me, and I encourage everyone in Massachusetts to buck the Puritan threads woven into the culture of Massachusetts and go ahead and open your combination cigarette and sex shop. I think that's a great idea.
Here to that for sure. The things that I can say, I mean, even though this is the internet, there's things that I can't say on the internet that I want to say about these people. And I refer to them as these people because they are these people. So based on the fact that the cops showed up and were shutting down stores, it obviously what Ethan is talking about in terms of the potential of this turning into a real drug war is for certain. I've got one more quick clip that I want to play from him that I want us to listen to. And I mean, the message here is not cheery. I would say there's no cheer involved. So this really, truly is a war on vaping.
Well, I mean, I tell you, when people ask me why I'm involved, the first reason I gave you before was because of this growing disparity between what the scientific evidence says on the one hand and what the public opinion and the politicians believe and do on the other. But the other reason is I think there's a decent possibility that we could be witnessing the beginnings of the first great drug war of the 21st century. And it's going to be a drug war that is going to start off with e-cigarettes, and then it's going to turn to cigarettes themselves. And I mean, mind you, there's a lot more rationale for banning cigarettes than there is e-cigarettes. But let's not forget, I mean, I even tell this to some of my allies in the tobacco harm reduction world who think that, God, if we could only get the percent of Americans who smoke down from 13% today down to 5% or 4%, then we should just ban cigarettes or ban cigarettes with nicotine in them. And what I remind them is that the entire war on drugs, right? I mean, apart from the marijuana piece, which is about arrest, but if you look at the mass incarceration, if you look at the horrifically violent drug wars in Latin America, and the Caribbean, now parts of Africa, Asia, what have you, if you look at the massive violation of human rights, all of that involves barely 2% of the U.S. population being deeply involved in the consumption of heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and drugs like that, right? So keep that in mind. Even if cigarette smoking goes down dramatically in this country to under 5%, if we make it fully illegal, you're talking about creating a global black market that will rapidly be worth many hundreds of billions of dollars. You're talking about tobacco traficantes replacing the narco traficantes. You're talking about police agencies and dedicated, tobacco enforcement agencies. You're talking about widespread drug testing in our society. You're talking about demonization and stigmatization of people. You're talking about parents having their kids ripped away from them at birth, or young kids because they smoke cigarettes in the house. I mean, you're talking about, that's what we had in the illicit drug area. And it was a horrific and remains a horrific violation of human rights in the United States, and still to some extent in your country, in Canada, and around the world. We're looking at that being a real possibility, because wars on drugs feed so many interests. They feed the media interest. They feed our need to have a boogeyman and to stigmatize and demonize others. They, as the class composition, as the class of people who consume these drugs gets lower and lower, relatively speaking, the willingness of the rest of society to demonize them and persecute and prosecute them becomes ever greater, right? Because they're no longer, quote unquote, our people. So I think this is a real possibility, and I'll be damned if I devoted, the last 30 years of my life in part to legalizing marijuana and trying to end the war on other illicit drugs, only to be, stepping down now and witnessing the emergence of a great big new drug war, which would do as much or more harm than those other ones did in the last century.
So basically, it could be the war on nicotine, essentially, could be the 21st century's drug war.
Yeah, and I think I might have a slightly different view of Ethan's take on sort of the timeline. I think that, the first places that we're going to see the real injustices against people is going to be with menthol. I know it sounds a lot like, whenever this issue is brought up to city councils, they are all very sensitive, of course, about events like Eric Gardner in New York City. But menthol cigarettes are very popular with the African American community and other minority groups in the United States. And what he was talking about there, this concept of being able to separate people who smoke or people who use drugs or people who use nicotine as sort of an other, I think there's a lot more possibility there for minority groups to be targeted as part of these new laws prohibiting menthol and prohibiting flavored vapor products. Now, the vapor product is a bit different, as I mentioned. These products are expensive. They're not very popular in minority groups, among low-income people, and so I think sort of the traditional targets for this racist, classist war on drugs, vaping isn't as popular among those folks as it is among the more white, affluent communities, and so I think just like what we saw with the drug war. That's still happening. Inner city black people use marijuana at the same rate as white folks in the suburbs, but because of the geography, because of the culture in the city, most things happen outdoors on the corner. Those people become the targets of law enforcement a lot easier than the white guy sitting in his pajamas selling weed on his couch. And so I think the very similar concepts apply here. And so that's why I think that we would see it first in cases where menthol has been banned. And I can't refer to any numbers, but I believe Oakland, California has actually seen a huge black market takeover where menthol cigarettes are banned. So yeah, this is ripe for injustice.
Sure. And Alex, there's a large part of our audience, I know, and definitely a large part of the United States, because there's a name for them, and they're called deplorables. And they believe that there's a war on white people going on by leftist progressives, which would be the tobacco control. I mean, there's no separation from Look, the social justice warriors that are screaming racist at white people are shiny suit progressives. They're shiny suit social justice warriors. So they're targeting, I believe, part of the thing about vaping is that they're targeting something that majority of white people do, and that is vaping. And I think the disgust that they've got for tobacco is easily transferred to the vapor because it's not a minority issue. I think if a lot of minorities were vaping, I don't know if we'd necessarily see the same kind of reaction that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, typically in minority communities, these are groups of people who can't necessarily afford to go to a party with Michael Bloomberg. They're not financially, they just don't have the means to be represented the way that rich suburban housewives are. So absolutely, I think it may have less to do with the color of someone's skin and more to do with their financial means. But yeah, I think it's reasonable to say that if vaping was predominantly limited to people who were lower income, I don't think we would be experiencing the hysteria that we're seeing now. Of course, it would only be a matter of time. You know, it's kind of like crack cocaine. Crack didn't become a big issue until white people started being affected by it. Right. So I think I think that it's amazing. They can do the math on something like that and come to that conclusion, but they can't do the math on how banning these products is going to fuel a massive black market.
And I mean, isn't that happening right now to some degree as well with the opioid crisis? Is that it hasn't quite yet come out of the up into the upper classes?
Well, I don't know the numbers, and I have to say, the opioid issue is not necessarily my issue area, but a lot of this, I think people certainly have made the argument that overprescribing of opioids has led to the epidemic that we have. I look at it a bit differently in that, people who went in for, surgeries and were prescribed opioids for pain management afterwards, or, any kind of pain issue that opioids would be prescribed for. And when they were supposed to end their prescription, they weren't being given appropriate information or counseling in order to get through that process, because I do believe it is a process. I have never been a fan of opioids. My drugs of choice were alcohol and things that make you feel a little happy. I do not like the downtown train. I've never had
Sounds
to deal
like
with
you and I
off.
rode the same train.
Yeah, probably. So I've never had to deal with coming off of opioids. I was actually prescribed Vicodin for having a tooth pulled a few years ago. I think I took 2 of them and was sort of done with it. I just don't like the way they make me feel. Again, no magical power to opioids. I think it really is people who have been using these products for long term with a sort of an end date in mind. They were just not treated properly around the time that they were supposed to stop that pain management strategy. And I think, again, that's just a failure, I think, of doctors and medical professionals to update what we know about substance use treatment. So opioids really, becoming chemically dependent on a substance does not necessarily discriminate based on your paycheck. So I think that, it really is actually, again, this is probably a bit more consistent, the idea that these drugs that people are getting from people in white lab coats, folks that we're supposed to be able to trust, and of course, people who can afford to buy these prescription medications, when all of these thousands of people started having problems with coming off of these drugs, then it became an issue. But heroin's been around for, centuries. Especially, the fentanyl issue has been around for well over a decade. When I was in rehab in 2006, several hundred people in Philadelphia died because they used heroin that was laced with fentanyl. We didn't hear about fentanyl, I don't think, in the mass media for several years later. Every time I heard a story about it a few years later, I thought, how are we just learning about this now? This has been going on. There was a crisis in Philadelphia at one point, and nobody seemed to care about it.
Right.
Maybe that has to do with the fact that it's Philadelphia. Sorry, Philly.
Yeah, sorry, Philly. Yeah. Oh, it's a mess everywhere, and that just points to that there's a lot of bigger problems I think that public health should be paying attention to, which they're not, as opposed to vaping is insane. So let's just close on Massachusetts with one final thought. I mean, what can happen there? You know, is this it? Like, what's CASAA doing?
Well, at the moment, there's not much to be done except for, for our part in this. We continue to engage where we can in terms of, getting people activated. The more consumers that we have among our ranks, the bigger, the louder the response that we can mount. And this is true for any state across the country. We need more and more people to respond when you get that message from us. Other strategies, I am not aware of the status of any lawsuits in Massachusetts. That is certainly an approach that the industry is able to take. And one of the reasons why I think we're all deferring to the industry for lawsuits is, number one, they can afford it. And number two, the judge can actually look at them and say, oh yeah, there is actually there are financial damages here that are quantifiable, and that gives you standing in a lawsuit. Unlike consumers who, for some reason, even though we are the primary stakeholders in all of this, judges typically do not acknowledge us as a stakeholder. And then, of course, there is, I expect there to be an effort to work through the legislature to fix this. Of course, the worst parts of this regulation and the law take effect immediately, and that's not going to do much to protect people who have businesses in Massachusetts, and certainly do a lot of harm to people who rely on those businesses for smoke-free products. But there's still 6 months in which people can work to advance some legislation to fix the worst parts of this. And, we're going to have fourth quarter data coming out about, sales of cigarettes. We already know that they're going back up. And it's not just because of, Massachusetts' policies, but I think if anybody can sort of zero in on cigarette sales in the state, you'll see a pretty noticeable increase in cigarette sales. Also, because of the panic and hysteria about the lung injuries, a lot of people have given up vaping and gone back to smoking. I think a noticeable amount of people, especially anybody who's switched to vaping in the past year or two, who is still kind of fresh and maybe researching, any potential risks associated with using a smoke-free product. These are folks who were not convinced. They're not, not folks like me who've dedicated their life and time to advocating for access. And so I think they would be very easily scared into going back to smoking.
Yes.
So it's going to take a whole lot of harm, actually, I think, before officials look at this and say, okay, maybe we made a mistake.
There's somebody said this to me today with regard to Canada, and I'm sure it'd be the same in the U.S. The vape shop owner basically pleading for help, some kind of communications help, to reach the public because breaking through the propaganda is just insurmountable, and the plea was, we have to get the information to the adults, and they were basically talking about the 50-year-olds and the 60-year-olds and stuff that have just, scurried away. Oh God, whatever that word is.
Scurried away.
Thank you. Yeah, scurried away. Yeah, because I guess there's some, they've seen that some of the younger people, maybe the more cloud-oriented kind of people, is what I assume is he was getting at. But it's just like, where are the adults? The adults have been scared away, and that's the big worry.
Yeah, it really is. It's folks, I'd say, 35 and up, who, folks who were smoking for 10 years or more, and even people who, I have to say, I've gotten emails from people who are just turning 18, and they say, I was smoking for 3 years and vaping was the only thing that helped me quit. So I don't necessarily think it's to adults. I think, there's that very uncomfortable story about students who are experimenting with products. They go on to use them habitually and they try everything to quit before they get into their 20s, and products like vaping are the only things that help them. Their stories are just as important as the 50-year-old who smoked for 35 years and after hypnosis and patches and gums, finally vaping worked for them. So I sort of agree. I think it's great to have parents and grandparents get up in front of city councils and talk reality about how quitting smoking by switching to a smoke-free product has improved their lives and improved the lives of their children. And children are grateful that mom and dad don't smoke anymore, or that grandma doesn't smell like an ashtray. All of those stories are important, but I think it's all ages here. I mean, the really uncomfortable part of this conversation is that there's a 13-year-old just like me who is stealing a pack of cigarettes right now, or bumming a cigarette off of a friend, and they're going to parties, they're doing all of these risky things. Their stories are just as important, and I think, I can't put myself in the shoes of a student right now, but I would hope that at least some of the older students look at all of the stuff that's going on and have at least that little bit of wisdom you get by the time you're 18 years old to turn around to their peers and say, guys, we're being lied to. There's a better way to understand drugs. There's a better way to understand tobacco and alcohol. And we're just not being served properly by all of this hysteria and panic. And I think most kids actually look at Truth Initiative materials and think it's absolute garbage. Involve the adults, but we can't discount the stories of the young people, and especially the young adults.
No, I mean, I do hear you. I do hear you for sure on that. So we're going to get to some of the other states right now and jump through that. Before we do, I want to remind our viewers that, of course, we are supported by you. We are fan funded, if fan is the right word. We cover regulations. It can't be fan. But if you can, please go to support.regulatorwatch.com and take a look around. There'll be some updating, of course, over Christmas holiday. I've still got our DC rally here, but the picture looks, so good. So I've just left it. But it was a lot of fun. It was good to be there in DC. So I'll have to figure out what we're going to do for our call to action for the new year. So of course, these are our supporters, great anchor supporters, Demand Vape and Flavor Art, and our brands and our other brand supporters who are killing it for us too. Divine just came on in Canada. Mike over at Divine in the group there, fantastic. You guys, I'm sure there's US vapes that are using Divine Labs, but let me just tell you right now, they're every single bit of juice in Canada has got something from Divine in it, I'm sure. At least all the ones that I've got. So anyhow, if you guys get a chance, please do go to the site. Even $10, helps. Of course, if you're an American, we want your greenbacks because they really, really help. We love Americans. So that's support.regulatorwatch.com. Dig in your wallet, find a few dollars, toss them our way. You'll be so happy you did it, and we'll be happy too. All right, so let's just go. We're going to actually go on your suggestion here, Alex, to Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, our favorite source for information.
Regrettably.
Go ahead. Yeah, regrettably.
I hate the fact that we have. So we have 50 state pages on our website, and there's a lot of sources are like this. They have very comprehensively put together these laws, and I hate citing them as a reference, but there you go.
Well, no, yeah, fair enough. But bans are their business. So if you want a list of the bans, why not? I mean, when this group is actually describing something that is truthful, that appears truthful, then you can trust it, right? That's it's one of those things. It's like a Wikipedia. If you're a good Wikipedia reader, you know what's good and what's not, right? So, but anyhow, so let's take a look at this. So there's Massachusetts, there's Michigan, Montana, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Utah, in Washington. So what can we say? We've done Mass, so let's just run through these real quick. What can you say about Michigan?
So actually, we can cross off a few of these really quickly.
Okay.
Michigan, the flavor ban there was blocked by the court. In Montana, the flavor ban there was also blocked by the court. And Oregon, the flavor ban was blocked by the court. And the kind of outlier in the states where things have been blocked is Utah. The Utah rule was pretty interesting, and it's a bit confusing, not as confusing as Massachusetts, but the Utah law was going to restrict sales of flavored vapor products to tobacco specialty shops, I believe, which does not actually include vape shops, or it's the problem was that a lot of vape retailers were not required to get this particular license, and so when the flavor ban was enacted there, all of these shops would have been affected by it and had to shut down. So the state had to go back, and the Utah Department of Health had to change the rule, and there were some people who were very happy about it, but they just didn't really understand what it meant. So the Department of Health is in the process of drafting a new rule as of November 1st, and I don't know if a public comment period is open yet or if the new language is posted, but so they're still in the process of refining their regulations, which may or may not be a flavor ban.
So and just one sec, so when you, before we go on to something else, when you say Michigan, Montana, and Oregon are blocked, are they blocked like New York is blocked, or are they blocked as in they can't move forward?
Blocked as a result of a court case, yeah. So it's in New York, they said the temporary restraining order. I don't exactly know if that's the same language they use in these other states, but I assume it's effectively the same thing.
So they're blocked right now, but they could still, that could be overturned.
I can't remember if Michigan, a lot of this had to do with whether or not the court agreed that the governor had the authority to enact this by executive order. And in the case of Washington State, the flavor ban there is effective. And the court ruled that Jay Inslee had the authority the governor had the authority to do this. As far as I know, researching some articles quickly before we came on, the next court hearing in that case is in February.
Okay, all right. And then did you mention Rhode Island?
I didn't, but there's a fun fact about Rhode Island.
Okay.
since we pointed out how the people promoting the bans have that air of credibility. What they have written there on their sheet is that the ban lasts for 6 months. This is a minor detail. In reality, the ban is effective for 4 months, and then at the end of that period, they have the option to renew it for an additional 60 days. But it seems that Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids has either jumped to the conclusion that it will last for 6 months, or they're just trying to convince people of how successful they are.
Right. Which, okay, fair enough. So, all right, well, they're corrupt liars, but that should become as no surprise. So what about California? I mean, they've got a lot of California here. I guess that's because they don't have a state initiative that they've been able to, get win there with, which is kind of surprising, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what's been happening in California over the past several years, and if you count cigarettes, well over a decade, is this sort of patchwork of regulations. Geographically, I can't tell you where all of these are. I think there's a pretty high concentration in the Bay Area. But basically what they do is they create this patchwork of regulation across the state, and that helps them when they go to Sacramento during legislative session and say, hey, guys, we need to come up with some sort of uniform policy to make sure that these tobacco laws are effective.
Right.
And so it's not, I don't know anybody who's familiar with all of these cities and their ordinances, but among this group here, the rules are different. You can see the bolded cities there are the places where menthol is restricted. And so it's yeah, it's different from municipality to municipality. Some of these are restricting sales to adult-only establishments, and others are banning flavors altogether.
Well, and California is truly an epicenter of the entire tobacco control battle.
I think Massachusetts and California are competing. The way that I heard it is a lot of these initiatives had actually started in Massachusetts back, during the tobacco wars. California, I think, just sort of gave it the Hollywood touch.
I didn't know that.
I can't tell you that it's 100% sure, but I did hear that from a government relations person who works for a tobacco company. So.
Well, they know who the enemy is. There's no doubt. It's just so weary. I'm going to put it on you for a second here. Let me just get you to give us just a couple of words about what you know about what's going on in Washington. Just with the actual, obviously, everything's closed. Is that what's happened there?
In Washington State?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't say that I'm totally clear on what's going on. If you can't sell flavored products, you can't sell flavored products. If 80 to 90% of your business is selling flavored e-liquids, then I imagine that a lot of shops are facing being closed. Now, I talked to my local brick and mortar shop guy, and he, in anticipation for this, set aside money to make sure that he could last for several months. So I don't know how many people in other states have done something so that they could keep their doors open and try to wait out a temporary ban, still making at least a little bit of income off of selling devices and tobacco flavors. But yeah, by and large, I imagine that things in Washington are pretty dire.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's because this is going to be pretty much, we've got just a few episodes left before the Christmas break, which pretty much starts for us at RegWatch a week Friday. So we're going to get a couple of pieces in next week on Canada. We've got Dr. Mark Tyndall coming on, which is going to be really good. And I encourage any of our U.S. viewers to be tuning in to these interviews too as well. Because there's a lot to be taken out of it. He's huge in harm reduction. In fact, Dr. Tyndall is responsible for the very first safe injection site in all of North America. So, and he's a huge supporter of vaping as a tool for harm reduction, and has been fighting the battle. And boy, it's bruising up here because we've got a national broadcaster that's actually against the industry too as well. So, but there you go. Yeah, so you really are our last of our kind of what's going on in the U.S. by states level, as opposed to a couple of more higher level things we're going to have before Christmas. So what do you see for 2020? Do you see the Trump ban coming back? Is that fully to bed? What's 2020 going to look like in the U.S., do you think? And by the way, let me get on the phone with my stockbroker first, right?
Yeah. The obvious point to make is that we are all staring down the barrel of May of next year. It is not clear how the FDA is going to enforce the PMTA deadline for manufacturers. And it's not clear what's going to be left of the industry over the next 6 months. Actually, 5.5 months? So I think it's pretty difficult to make predictions as to what the market's going to look like. In terms of legislation, states are, any of these states that came out and said, actually, I have a list of all the states that have tried or otherwise been successful in enacting flavor bans, and then others who we've heard rumblings from. So obviously California, there was some news out of Colorado that I believe there's not much appetite for banning flavors through the legislature, which is good news. Connecticut is looking for stuff in the legislature. believe Florida is okay. I might be a little bit wrong about that, but there are bills introduced. There's some pre-file stuff out there. Georgia's looking at some stuff, not surprisingly, around Atlanta. Illinois, Kentucky had a pre-filed bill that showed up today. Illinois, of course. Louisiana, the governor needs to be educated about that. I'm working on something right now in sort of coordinating with LAVA, the industry group down there, to put together an education campaign for the governor so that he better understands the products before making ridiculous regulations like Massachusetts. Maryland, just mentioned Massachusetts, Michigan. Missouri, we even heard some rumblings about flavor bans there. Montana's already on the list. Didn't hear anything from New Hampshire, but it's on my list anyway. New Jersey is another. Year after year, New Jersey has tried to ban flavors, and now they may have a bit more traction through the legislature. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas has seen some local issues pop up. Vermont, on the other hand, it's on my list, but Governor Scott deferred to federal officials on that one. Good move for any governor, honestly. There were even some rumblings in Virginia. I think that's been nipped in the bud. West Virginia, some flare-ups there. And Kentucky and West Virginia, by the way, sort of trade places for who has the highest smoking population in the country. I've always thought that West Virginia would actually be the best state to fully deploy a harm reduction strategy for smoking, and really, I think, see things turn around. And especially, West Virginia is a very poor state, and could certainly use access to affordable alternatives. So that's my running list of states where we've seen local issues pop up, pre-filed bills pop up, and other states like New Jersey who just have a history of introducing nonsense.
Wow.
And then, of course, not to be outdone, we have Representative Frank Pallone from New Jersey, who is running HR 2339. I forget the title of it, Protect Kids from Horrible Things Act of 2019. And this has several things. There's a much bigger timeline here. Some of these things are 2 years, some of these things are 3 years. For example, mandating that the FDA promulgate a rule banning flavors. They would ban online sales, raise the age to 21. Basically, sort of everything in the kitchen sink you could throw at vaping is in HR 2339. And there's also Rosa DeLaura's. It's not really an online sales ban, but it will make vape mail basically impossible, right, as we know it. You can still get it through UPS, I think, is the one company that reliably has signature on delivery. When I get signature only stuff, it comes through UPS. And so just so people understand what this means for how vape mail could change, I buy Swedish snus, and I buy it from Sweden because the good stuff isn't sold in the United States, with the exception of maybe Swedish match stuff. Every time I order, I'm paying $30 to $40 for shipping because it has to be sent. What coming from overseas doesn't help, but the signature on delivery is an added cost, and it makes up most of that shipping charge. So if you depend on online sales to get your products and you want to pay $15 to $20 extra every time you order, then by all means, let Rosa DeLaura's bill go unscathed. But if you don't have access to a vape shop and would like to get your stuff through the mail, we have an engagement up about that as well. So
and that's really the key thing. Go to CASAA.org, which was in your name key the whole time, and sign up for these activation emails is what they are, right?
Yeah, really the easiest thing for anybody to do is visit august8th.org, and it's August 8, the number, th.org, and that will take you to sort of the most relevant federal engagement that we have. And right now that's focused on both really this started as, this went up, I think September 10th, right before the Trump announcement, and before a lot of these other bills started getting traction in Congress. So right now it's sort of geared toward Frank Pallone's bill, but it really is intended as a general kind of engagement. There's, I think, a dozen or more vaping-related bills in Congress right now, but only 2 of them are really gaining steam. So taking action through that engagement, you automatically become a member. That's the magic here. That you just take action and you are officially a CASAA member, absolutely for free.
Got to be action, man. That's the thing. If there's one thing to learn from tobacco control, is action is key.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us tonight here on RegWatch. Just stand by right there and I'll catch you before we go. So that is it, everybody, for this edition of RegWatch. Make sure you go to support.regulatorwatch.com, dig in your wallet, find a few dollars, kick them over to us. You'll be happy if you did that. And I say that quickly only because I want to hurry you along to go do that. And while you're online, make sure you like us on Facebook. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For regulatorwatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford. Vape 'em if you got 'em.